effective discharge of my mandate and fact-finding, not least as I report to the Human Rights Council in Geneva next week. I have had the privilege of meeting with Samdech Prime Minister Hun Sen, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of the Interior Samdech Pralakon Sarkeng, His Excellency Deputy Prime Minister and Minister in charge of the Council of Ministers Sokan, His Excellency Mak Sambat, Chair of the Cambodian Human Rights Committee, His Excellency Han Chong Naron, Minister of Education, Youth and Sport, His Excellency Se Sam Al, Minister of the Environment, His Excellency Anbong Batana, Minister of Justice, His Excellency Ik Sam Heng, Minister of Labour and Vocational Training, and His Excellency Chia Sofara, Minister of Rural Development. I have also met with other senior officials from the National Assembly and the Senate, members of the United Nations system in Cambodia, and representatives of a broad range of civil society actors and other stakeholders. I have also undertaken a field visit to Kokong Province, where I met with provincial government and court authorities, civil society representatives, community members and private sector actors. Although I have visited Cambodia many times, my first visit as Special Rapporteur has been an opportunity to establish channels of communication with the senior members of government and to hear directly from a broad cross-section of the population, including at grassroots level. I was pleased by the frank and informative discussions that I have had with all whom I have been able to interact. I thus wish to thank all my interlocutors for these meetings, which have helped me deepen my understanding of the human rights situation in the country. Cambodia continues to develop at an extraordinary pace and contemporaneously is assuming a growing role within ASEAN and the world at large. Several government ministers explained the ongoing reforms within their areas of responsibility. Moving forward, it is important that all actors can play a meaningful role in the discussions on the future of this country. Indeed, one of the main positive features of Cambodia's society is the space which allows social media and civil society to flourish. I am appreciative of the acknowledgement of what needs to be done and the willingness of many stakeholders to engage with me in a constructive dialogue to secure the continued growth and stability of Cambodia. I plan to build on the work of my 5 predecessors. Their observations outline the challenges that this country has faced in promoting and protection of human rights. And they also made a number of concrete recommendations in that regard. I concur with the view expressed that strengthening the rule of law, further developing and ensuring the independence of those bodies with specific roles in the protection of human rights, particularly the judiciary, is essential for building the stable, democratic nation that Cambodians aspire to live in. Care must be taken to properly address situations which have created widespread discontent, including land and labour disputes. The Prime Minister raised the issue of discrimination. In my opinion, discrimination is a matter of concern in any state. My predecessor, Professor Subedi, noted in his final press statement that after coming this far in the journey towards good governance, stronger democracy, rule of law, and greater respect for human rights, there should be no room in Cambodian politics for racism, xenophobia, and discrimination of any kind on any grounds. I echo his opinion. Discrimination on any ground is a legitimate concern when promoting human rights in an equitable, fair society. It is a tool which can be used to limit the enjoyment of human rights by individuals and groups within society. International law is clear that rights and freedoms shall be enjoyed without distinction of any kind, including on the grounds of race, colour, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability or other status. Whether indigenous people and land rights, women and access to justice, asylum seekers and the recognition of refugee status, workers and labour rights, urban poor and the treatment of street people, rural poor and land concession settlements, the potential for discrimination to undermine respect for human rights is omnipresent. Ensuring respect for all human rights and fundamental freedoms is the primary obligation of any state which accepts international human rights treaties. By voluntarily having ratified many of these treaties, the Royal Government of Cambodia has agreed to take all necessary administrative, legislative and related steps to ensure the protection of rights within its jurisdiction. This includes the adoption of laws which respect human rights norms and legally guarantee the fair and equal enjoyment of the rights contained in those treaties. Several key laws with considerable implications for human rights have been adopted in recent years, and several more are in progress, including the draft trade union law and the draft cybercrime laws. Ensuring inclusiveness and transparency in lawmaking is an integral requirement for democracy and good governance. I am grateful for the frank exchanges on the progress and challenges faced in the area of land concessions, which is without doubt a complex human rights issue facing the nation. Many of those who have suffered from forced evictions continue to seek justice, while the process of conferring land titles and redressing problematic land concessions granted in the past is beginning to see a degree of progress, a degree of success. I fully agree with the recommendations made by my predecessors and encourage the continued review of the concessions, including their cancellation and redistribution as appropriate. As acknowledged by many, there is still much to be done, particularly for the most marginalised, such as Indigenous peoples. The ability of all persons to obtain redress and contribute to finding solutions to land, labour and other disputes often depends on their ability to peacefully exercise their fundamental freedoms of expression, assembly and association. These are the building blocks upon which many of their other rights depend. Thus, much of the continuation of peace and stability in the months and years ahead will depend on how well these rights and freedoms are respected and how justly the domestic laws that govern them in Cambodia, including the law on associations and NGOs and the law on peaceful demonstration, are implemented across the country. In my interactions, I have noted that there seems to be widely diverging interpretations of permissible restrictions of these rights under international human rights law. The balance between protecting these freedoms and maintaining public order can be a difficult one for any state. Nevertheless, that balance must be struck fairly and in accordance with international human rights law. I will be paying particularly close attention to these rights during the discharge of my functions. Given my background, I am firmly of the view that education, particularly human rights education, is a key to securing a just and more equitable future for the people of Cambodia. The importance of ensuring better access and better quality of education is necessitated by the demographic composition of Cambodian society. Within education, broadly construed, it is important to ensure the development of awareness of human rights amongst all actors. Ensuring awareness among children and youth, law enforcement officers, parliamentarians, all levels of government and the judiciary will help Cambodia better fulfil its human rights obligations. Human rights education should, in my view, be a cornerstone of Cambodia's future, but also its present. In this connection, I have been struck in meeting after meeting with senior government officials by their expressions of appreciation and pledges for cooperation with the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. I sincerely hope to see that cooperation continue, for advice, no matter how sound, will require action to impact on the lives of people. The Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights is well placed to provide the necessary technical assistance to help give effect to the recommendations emanating from this mandate, as are a number of development partners that are lending assistance in areas of critical importance to the realisation of human rights. I am deeply honoured to have been entrusted with this mandate by the United Nations Human Rights Council. I pledged to undertake this important task with honesty, neutrality, and in a spirit of cooperation. I am grateful for the government and the people of Cambodia for welcoming me most warmly during this visit. Thank you.
Thank you for the statement. Around the room. The Khmer version will come out shortly. It's under reproduction now. As usual, the floor is open to question and answers. We'll take them in groups of 3 to make them now manageable for the special rapporteur. I see card 1. Second request, yes, question, and third. Very good. Please.
Hi. I would like to know if you discussed the situation of the Vietnamese multi-yard asylum seekers. Because about 2 weeks ago, the Interior Ministry spokesman said that they would have to return to Vietnam willingly or they would be forcibly deported. And I want to know if this was an issue that you raised.
I'm Nikat from Radio Creation. Recently, some of the CMLP activists, including also the senator Mr. Hong Seok was arrested. And the CMLP say this is a human rights violation because of the independence of the court, something like this. So, what do you think about this arrest, and have you talked about this with Prime Minister Hun Sen or Mr. Stalin or this? And what should be done? Because the CMLP also hope that your visit will help improve the situation, this situation. And my second question is that Mr. Certainly found that there are 4 main causes of human rights violation in Cambodia. One is the irregularity of the election. Secondly is the ineffectiveness of the assembly. Secondly is the injustice and independent of the court. And third is land grabbing. All of these 4 are the main causes of human rights violation in Cambodia. How about you? Do you have anything, or do you think of any other factor that lead to human rights violations in Cambodia? And what do you think about this factor of Mr. Sokli found? What have been improved and what have not been improved? Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll take our third speaker.
Good afternoon. I'm Sukrit from UB, one of the Democracy Leader. I have a similar question to about Hong Seok, the senator's case, because President Party has sent you a letter requesting for your intervention for this case. So what was your response to this? And second one is about, because you are going to send a report to the UN next week. After you receive your what is the main issue that you have found in Cambodia that you're going to report back to the UN?
Thank you for the question. With respect to your question about raising the position of the Montagnards with His Excellency Sartén, the answer is no, I didn't have time because the meeting was shorter, but I did mention the issue to the Prime Minister. With respect to the second series of questions, I think the Prime Minister raised in passing the matter of some people being arrested and detained for various reasons, but I did not directly address it with the Prime Minister this time. Your second question related to the 4 principal areas which my predecessor focused on. I think there is no doubt that they are important issues for the human rights situation in Cambodia. I think that there is evidence of progress in each of those categories, as indeed Professor Subedi noted in his final report to the Human Rights Council last year and in his final press statement in January this year. So he reported on some progress, sometimes more significant than others, in each of those fields. I would echo the fact that they are important areas for human rights, and I have, of course, read and understood the report submitted by my predecessor on each of those topics. With respect to the third question, next week when I go to Geneva, I already have submitted the report. The report was submitted to the United Nations in June, and that's the report that I'm basically presenting, if you like, next week in Geneva. So the report is the one that's already publicly circulated, that was sent in June. That's the report that's being discussed. I have the opportunity to present the report and consequently to make some comments and a statement regarding my visit, because obviously the report was submitted before I had the opportunity to visit Cambodia in this capacity. So consequently, during my opening remarks to introduce the report, I will have the opportunity to reflect on my visit to Cambodia this week and last week.
So are you planning to bring an issue to report back to the UN when you present the report?
Yes, I will be raising issues with the UN with the report next week. As I said, I have the opportunity to reflect on my visit this week and last week in order to consider what comments I will make when I introduce the report to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva next week.
Okay, I'd like to open the floor now for a second round of questions. If we could three again. Okay, one. Is there? Yes, two. Would someone else like to be the third to pose questions? Okay, so we proceed with two. Let us ask for the floor, please.
Hello. Okay. First of all, sorry, I was under the impression that this report was going to be produced and submitted by you, so could you just tell us who that report was actually produced by and who submitted it? Is it June, because that's before you visited the country? But the question I wanted to ask is, you talked about pledges for cooperation from high-ranking members of the government, yet at the same time you also mentioned the fact that they've recently passed an NGO law which has been heavily criticised around the world and inside the country for, and there is more legislation in the works that is most likely to pass. Do you not see a massive disparity between you welcoming those comments that they're going to, they've pledged their cooperation, while at the same time they're pushing through legislation to severely restrict human rights?
Sorry, before you give up your microphone, could you please identify yourself?
With respect to the first set of comments or questions, the report to the Human Rights Council was written by me and submitted in accordance with the UN procedure. So that's an easy one to answer. With respect to the pledges of cooperation with the government, my comments in my statement at the end of mission reflect the fact that several government ministers did reiterate that they were willing to work with me with the mandate and with advancing human rights in Cambodia. I did discuss concern with several ministers over how certain laws are adopted in Cambodia, and I explored with several institutions and senior members of each institution the lawmaking process and the scope for circulating early drafts of laws and having greater and fuller discussion thereon. So I did raise those issues with them. I don't see the passing of laws as being necessarily contradictory to pledges of cooperation, because the pledges of cooperation relate to the discharge of the mandate, not to passing or not passing any particular laws. Turning to the second question with respect to the refugees from Australia, I think the decision of the Cambodian government to accept refugees from Australia can be viewed as evidence of Cambodia rising to become an international actor. It is concerning that on the one hand there are discussions on accepting further refugees from Nauru, while on the other hand there are challenges because of the lack of the opportunity for registration and determination of status for asylum seekers who are currently in Cambodia and are wishing to have their refugee status recognised and all the protections required under the Refugee Convention granted to them. So I think there's possibly an issue with that. With respect to the judiciary, there are certainly numerous comments made by my predecessor concerning judicial independence in Cambodia. It is an issue that I am aware is a major problem in many respects, and I discussed with both the Minister of Justice and yesterday the need for a strong independent judiciary in Cambodia to guarantee the fair and full protection of all human rights.
Are there any follow-up questions? Just one point of clarification from the Secretariat of the Special Procedures of the United Nations. The report to the September sessions of the Human Rights Council, which is the session in which traditionally the Special Rapporteur on Cambodia will report to the Council, will have a deadline. It will always be normally 2.5 months before the actual session, so it always falls in June. So that's the immutable part of the deadline and what explains the disparity between the submission of the report and this mission. Can I
have a question.
Final?
A question from my colleague. Is that okay?
Okay. 1, 2, sir behind. Is there a third person who would like to pose a question?
Yeah. This question is asked by my colleague. She's not here. As he asked, what do you think about the situation of women's rights and children's rights in Cambodia? What are the barriers and what should be done to solve the problems? And my second question is my question related to you personally. Why do you apply to be an envoy, human rights envoy to Cambodia? Is that because of you want to contribute to help Cambodia, or you see proud Cambodia to be shown, or what?
Hi, I am Chanko from August. I want to ask you about social media. You said that one of the more positive features is
I can see in recent months, we have also seen some breakouts online, and the 2008 election is going to be the election. So that we can say about this breakout in China.
Oh, sorry.
During the passing of the NGO law, several NGOs and international organisations came out and called on donor nations to stop funding this government because of the laws they're passing. Now, Cambodia receives over 800 million a year. 100 million or more is dispersed by the UN. Do you think that restricting the amount of aid would be an effective way of forcing the government to behave?
Okay, thank you. Firstly, looking at the rights of women and children in Cambodia, I am in no doubt that there is considerable room for improvement in the position of women and children in Cambodia. Without doubt, there are numerous violations of their rights day in, day out. There are particular issues with rural communities, indigenous people, and urban and rural poor people. So the answer to that is yes, there is certainly considerable scope for improvement. In my experience to date, Cambodia is not a country at which in all actions, all activities, all levels of interaction there is gender equality or the rights of children are fully respected. So yes, there are considerable issues there. Why be the UN rapporteur? I think in the last week I've asked myself that question a few times. For me, I feel that it's one role in which I could perhaps help try to contribute towards the development of the full respect, protection and promotion of human rights in Cambodia. And that is the driving factor for me in this role. Turning to the issue of social media, my comments reflect the fact that to me, Cambodia is traditionally and hitherto a remarkably open society with a vibrant civil society organisation, numerous non-governmental organisations and increasingly incredibly active social media. It's always fun with my friends to somewhere without Wi-Fi and see how many minutes until they start becoming stressed that they can't access Facebook. So without doubt, it's been something that has been a major feature in Cambodia. My comments relate to the fact that great care must be taken in any restrictions of either of these spheres of activity and operation in Cambodia. There are circumstances in accordance with international human rights law when it is legitimate to limit actions of NGOs or indeed to require some forms of registration, and when it might be legitimate to limit freedoms in social media. However, these limitations are very few and must be strictly construed by law enforcement officers and the judiciary only for the means necessary to secure the legitimate aim. The balance and the emphasis must always be on freedom of expression, association and assembly in accordance with the international human rights treaty obligations which Cambodia has ratified and thus is legally bound under international law to give effect to. The final question dealing with donor aid. The money that comes in and out of Cambodia is not something that falls directly within my mandate other than looking at the impact it might have on human rights. There are numerous examples around the world of when aid has been given to try to enhance protection of human rights. and when aid has been restricted or withdrawn to try to enhance protection of human rights. So it's a matter of trying to determine for those donors, those international organisations and those states what they think would be the best policy to pursue. If you look at the examples around the world, there are positives and negatives for each approach, and it's something that it is up to each organisation and donor to make their own decision on. It's not something I have any need at this moment to comment on. It's something they have to decide for themselves. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for one final round of questions. Yes, I have one request. And then, sorry, before you begin, is there anyone else who would like to pose a question? Two? Okay, let's proceed with that, please, sir.
This is Soisa from AFP. My question is that given the arrest of opposition activists and opposition senators, as well as the land difficulties ongoing issue, are you concerned at all about the treatment of human rights in Cambodia? And can you say where is the human rights report for Cambodia? Thank you.
I have another question, but I think this is not appropriate because you were planning to come here at first. You planned to come in May, but you postponed it because due to the administration and logistics problem. Could you be more specific? What problem was that? In Cambodian side or the Cuban side? And why did you take so long to plan the second trip to make it in this month? Why not before June that we supposed to submit the report to the UN? Thank you.
I'm sorry, could you identify yourself again, please?
I'm Sutu from Voice of Democracy.
I think that was it. No?
I think with respect to arrests of anyone, any form of arrest and detention for any reason, always engaging human rights law. When the state exercises authority to remove the liberty of an individual, it's always a very serious matter. To me, it's of fundamental importance that any arrest is carried out in accordance with the law and is subject to review regularly to determine the legitimacy of the continued detention in accordance with both the law and with international human rights obligations. I am aware of a number of high-profile arrests for reasons which are reported to be related to politics and or land disputes, as well as a number of other reasons. And I can assure you that I am monitoring and following these over the course of the mandate. Turning to the question of timing, the reason for the deferral or postponement of the mission was nothing to do with Cambodia. It was, as I believe the press statement said at the time, for internal logistical issues within the UN. So it's nothing to do with Cambodia at all. The Cambodia government did issue an invitation in due time for that original planned mission. With respect to the timing of the rescheduling, the nature of a mission such as this is rather complex. It's not something I can just decide one day I would like to come to Cambodia and get on a plane. There is a lot of organisation that is required, both through official channels with the government to secure an invitation to visit and the necessary visa documentation, but also on the part of the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, which supports the mandate, because they obviously have to put in place a lot of arrangements for transport, for meetings, for all sorts of logistical arrangements within Cambodia. So the timing of the missions are partly dictated by diplomatic norms and partly by pragmatic, practical reasons of when it's possible to have a period of time in which a visit can be subject to an invitation by the government and supported fully by the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. Without both factors, it would not be possible to undertake a country visit. Thank you.
Yeah, final question. Is there anybody else who would like to pose a question? Last call.
Last question.
Nhưng chua rừng thì lớn thì tạo quan điểm mấy mấy để ta một cái đánh giá thì hoặc là cha này cho mặt được một món hay đi cảm thấy để trong sân người cảm thấy tình nút nông còn ra mình làm được cái cảm thấy trong được xây liên thiết vì sự xây dựng chính tế bám cao tiếp của anh chị nơi nông đồng bằng liên thiết mình cần ai để Việt Nam để Thái để Lào ta Campuchia nhân lệ là sao chứ khác thì có biên lệ là sau chứ có biên của biên đi luôn thành ba sang trên hàng và học được.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. My last question is very simple. You have been a special reporter and visit Cambodia for over a week. I want you to compare between being a UN reporter and being an international human rights professor. Which one is more difficult for you?
Thank you. With respect to the first comment on freedom of expression and the laws on NGOs, I am aware that a number of countries in the region either have adopted or are currently considering adopting laws in this area. However, my mandate relates primarily to Cambodia, and I have not had the opportunity to undertake detailed research on this topic on other countries in ASEAN. I have seen copies of some of the draft laws, for example Myanmar, but I don't think I'm in a position to be able to fully analyse or differentiate between them at this stage. What I would say is that for all countries of the world I'm aware of at the moment, there is concern particularly over freedom of expression and over the use of cybercrime type activities. So it's a topic which is of concern not only in Cambodia but certainly to the wider international community, and it's something that has been looked at across the world. Clearly, international human rights law, all human rights apply not only to physical media but also to online and internet media. There is no difference, or there should be no difference, in the enjoyment of freedom of expression in a newspaper or the enjoyment of freedom of expression in Facebook or a blog. It should make no difference in medium, according to the United Nations General Assembly and its resolution looking, and the Human Rights Council looking at internet media and human rights. So there shouldn't be any difference. With respect to whether it's easier or better to come here as a visiting professor or as a UN Special Rapporteur, it's certainly easier for me to come here as a visiting professor because that's what I know and that's what I do, and it's something that I have done in Cambodia for about 4 years. So from that point of view, it's much easier. The role of Special Rapporteur certainly brings with it additional challenges, and clearly it involves interaction with a much wider range of stakeholders and actors than was hitherto the case. Certainly, in my experience as a professor, you don't normally have meetings with the top of all the senior government officials. That's not normally what happens as a visiting professor. So clearly it's a completely different role. I think it's a role that brings considerable challenges, but then to others, so does the role of being a visiting professor. So it's an interesting experience to have a different role, and it's something that I'm looking forward to developing in the future. Thank you.
If there are no further questions, then at this stage, I'd like to thank the Special Rapporteur and all of you for coming. If there are any questions about the role of the Special Rapporteur, you've just heard what